negotiated a very favorable peace treaty with my northernmost kingdom, the lands ruled by the Starks. I and Rickard Stark have agreed to the following terms. Robert rolled out a bit of parchment from within his breast pocket, before clearing his throat loudly. Firstly, the crown will pay the North 200,000 golden dragons, to be distributed evenly amongst the great houses of the North. They will also pay House Stark 200,000 golden dragons for their services and sacrifices throughout Rickard's rebellion. Low murmuring filled the hall, but Tywin wasn't impressed. It was a lot of money, but not for a Lannister. Secondly, no taxes will be enforced upon any northern goods until such a time as determined by Rickard Stark, or his death. Tywin's eyebrows rose on his head. Now that was an incredibly generous term of peace. One that would benefit the North, and do little to benefit anyone else. Thirdly, the North shall always have a permanent position on the small council, only to be held by a Northern in whatever capacity the head of House Stark wishes them to serve. They shall also have a permanent position upon the Kingsguard, once again determined by the head of House Stark. Tywin's jaw dropped open in disbelief. This would give the North, and by proxy the Starks, a level of control over the Seven Kingdoms for the entirety of Robert's rule and for however long his sons wished to continue the tradition. One thing would be for certain though, Tywin would do all he could to reverse it. Fourthly, the new gift shall be returned to the jurisdiction of House Stark effective immediately. The Starks shall also have exclusive rights to the lands, incomes, resources and peoples living beyond the wall. Tywin nodded. At least this was a term to be expected. The North had always resented losing the new gift. Though the second point showed Rickard Stark's plans for the years to come. Clearly he hoped to colonize the lands beyond the wall. Fifthly, every house within the Seven Kingdoms shall fulfill their duties to the Night's Watch. Any house who does not fulfill their duties will have the offending lord sent to the wall to swear the oaths. This shall be policed by the Starks. This was bad, Tywin thought. Very bad. Sixth. The North, and the Starks have the right to act against foreign entities without permission from the Crown. They have the right to build and maintain as large a navy and army as they please and the right to exert these forces in overseas conflicts. Gods, Tywin thought as his heart began to race. This would make the North into a true superpower, leagues ahead of every other kingdom within Westeros. It make them nigh invincible to southern interference with their affairs. 7. The North shall also have the right to sign trade and commerce deals with foreign entities, once again without the Crown's permission. They shall also have the right to legitimize their own bastards, though this must be done with the permission of the head of House Stark. Tywin struggled to keep a straight face. This was more power than had even been given to Dorne, and Dorne had never been defeated like the North had. Finally Robert said as he glanced down to Rickard Stark, the North has the right to declare independence from the Iron Throne whenever the head of House Stark sees fit. Rickard Stark has shown however that he will not cede from the Seven Kingdoms until after my death, and indeed may never cede from the Seven Kingdoms. Tywin paled as his own words came back to haunt him. He heard footsteps and turned to see Rickard Stark approaching him. The burnt lord leaned in close and grasped him by the arm. Now we'll see if my grandson will bow to yours. With that, the burnt lord turned and walked away, the retinue that had entered the throne room with him, following in his wake. Notes. If it wasn't clear by the end of this chapter, Rickard's memories of the Tower of Joy were distorted. Also, just an explanation of why Jon is not Lyanna's son in this story. With Aegon living he is not the heir to the throne. Therefore there is no point to him being a Targaryen, and I can make a much better story out of him being the heir to the North and linked to House Dane. Thanks to those of you who supported my decision even though some of you didn't like it. I appreciate all your comments, so keep them coming. Chapter 67, Home Sweet Home. Summary. Rickard and Ned arrive back at Winterfell. Leave a comment and tell me what you think. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Ned. Ned galloped up the King's Road, the gates of Winterfell rapidly growing larger in the distance. He could see the towers of the Wolfhold, and beyond them the crenulations of Winterfell itself. The weather was glorious. The sun was shining in the sky, the air was frigid but still, and the snow blanketed everything around them. It was stunningly beautiful, the home that Ned had spent many a night dreaming of. A horse shot past him, with a purple cloak billowing in the wind. Ashura's laugh carried on the air down to Ned, and Ned couldn't help the grin that burst out across his features. He was home. Home with the woman he loved. He would finally be able to show her everything they had whispered of at Harrenhal. The somber godswood within Winterfell, the hot springs that littered the city, and the baths within Winterfell itself. He would be able to take her to the top of the first keep, and down into the depths of the crypts. Together they would be able to forge the life they had dreamed of back beneath the burned towers of Harrenhal. Ned kicked his horse's sides and it shot forwards, faster, trying to catch up to the bewitching woman who raced ahead of them. To Ned's delight, his great war horse began to pick up speed and eventually thundered past Ashura's horse. He caught sight of her crestfallen expression and burst out laughing, before pulling his horse to a stop just before they reached the gates. Ashura's horse pulled up not long after, and Ned grinned at her as she pulled to a stop next to him. She scowled at him. It was all the snow. My poor horse isn't used to such cold weather. Of course. Ned conceded, though the smug look on his face suggested otherwise. She eyed him out of the corner of her eye for a minute, before turning her gaze back down the cobbled King's Road to where the rest of Rickard Stark's retinue came. Howland Reed had left them at the Salt's Moor, though, returning to the Crannogs of the Neck. Davos Seaworth and Bern Salt Stark had also left them at Salt's Moor, Bern back to sailing the waters of the Bight, and Davos to his new keep with his wife and children. Davos Seaworth was a lord now, and in a few years his children would be called to the Wolfhold, to attend Jon Stark, Ned's son and heir to Winterfell. Rickard Stark appeared on the horizon now, guarded by the ever-present Lord Commander of the Weirwood Warriors, Roderick Walton, and the captain of his household guard, Martin Castle. Behind him came a retinue of Winter Wolves and Weirwood Warriors, guarding the carriages that carried Jon Stark and his wet nurse as well. Behind them rode the disgraced knights, Sir Arthur Dayne and Sir Oswell Went. They had largely kept to themselves for the duration of the journey, though strangely Ethan Glover and Oswell Went had struck up a friendship. Ethan had all but loathed the man until they had gotten into a drunken fist fight at the Inn of the Kneeling Man. After 4 black eyes, 5 missing teeth and a broken jaw, the two had spent a lot of time together and often went off hunting together. The two of them had proven able hunters and often brought back the dinner for that evening. Arthur Dayne had done next to nothing except practice his swordplay whenever they stopped. It had gotten worrying after a while, and Ned had said something to Ashura, but she had pursed her lips and shook her head. He was angry, she said, and working through it the only way he knew how. The next day Ned had sent Roderick Walton to spar with the man. Arthur had been less broody after that, but still spent many of his days muttering darkly. The only person who could lift him from his mood every time was Little John. Arthur absolutely adored his nephew and spent many days when they were moving sitting in the carriage with him. John, it seemed, adored his uncle as well, for he never failed to smile when his uncle entered the room. Rickard Stark had been the only other person who was able to draw laughter from the babe, but Ned had no idea how. They had met Bern Stark's bastard son at the Salt's Moor, Torrhen Snow, and he had burst into tears at the mere sight of him. Ned's father had also been largely quiet for the duration of the trip, and Ned often caught him staring north, muttering about 3-eyed ravens. It had been strange, but Rickard Stark had changed greatly since he was burned. No more was he the man who Ned had gone to for hugs when he had nightmares. He was the burnt lord now. The retinue reached the gates and Rickard glanced at his son. "Who won?" he asked. "I did," Ned said. "Ashura couldn't keep up with our northern horses." Rickard grunted. "I would have been surprised if she could. My grandfather spent thousands of dragons on that bloody horse breeding program." Together, they entered the Winter City, the conquering Starks returning home, Rickard Stark having swindled the South of pretty much any power they once had over them. Ned had felt bad seeing his father manipulate his friend's love for him, but then he remembered his demands to kill Jon and his heart hardened. They passed through the gates of Winterfell, and into the city proper. It seemed as if the entire city had turned out to see their homecoming. Crowds lined the clean streets and Ned breathed in deeply. A city that didn't smell like shit. It was glorious. Stark. 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 The crowds chanted while on the walls the snowcloaks rattled their spears against their shields. Their bronze armor glinted in the sun and Ned smiled. Home he was and home he would stay. He had no intention of ever leaving here again. The retinue made their way through the city's winding streets, and came upon the gates of Winterfell itself. They passed through, and Ned's heart caught in his chest. Standing there, with the household assembled before him, was his little brother, Benjen. Gone were his laughing eyes, and in their place a somber haunted spectre. Ned and his father dismounted and Benjen dropped to his knees. "Father," he said, "Winterfell is yours." Rickard Stark smiled down at the boy and pulled him to his feet. "Up, Benjen. You have served me well. You shall be rewarded." Benjen got to his feet and smiled at Ned sadly. "Hello, brother." Ned pushed his way past his father and enveloped his little brother in a bear hug. "I've missed you," Ned whispered hoarsely. "Me too," Benjen replied, and Ned felt his little brother's body begin to quiver. He glanced at his father, who dismissed the rest of the household. "Let's go to my solar," he said. "We have much to discuss." Rickard stepped back into his solar, a room he hadn't seen in over a year. His large ebony desk still dominated the room, while on the floor rested the same snow bear pelt. His bookshelves were crowded with the records and documents of the last 284 years, and Rickard's gaze fell upon the red book that sat on a pedestal. He would have to update that soon. Rickard's rebellion needed to be recorded. Hidden away, behind a tapestry of Brandon snow in the Godswood, sat the secret room where the bloody book and the blessed book were kept. Rickard resisted the urge to go and check the room. He had people with him. That would be far from proper. He had already violated more of the bloody sanctions than any other lord of Winterfell before him. He had no wish to violate any more. He stepped into the room and threw a log on the crackling hearth. The flames soared and warmth filled the room. Rickard strode around and sat down in his plush chair, while his sons and good daughter entered the room, the latter a bit hesitantly. "Take a seat," he said as he gestured to the chairs that were arrayed in front of his desk, and his children did so. Rickard reached over and poured them all ale, before taking a long swig of his own. He would need this for the conversation he was about to have. "To Brandon," he toasted as he raised his mug. "To Brandon," the three repeated. "To Lyanna," Rickard said softly. "To Lyanna," the three repeated. Rickard drained the rest of his cup and slammed it down upon his desk. "Right," he said. "We need to have a talk." Benjen nodded. "What happened to Lyanna?" he asked. Rickard's face twisted in agony. "She died in childbirth." Benjen's face crumpled. "And the babe?" he asked. "Dead," Rickard replied, and his heart went out to his youngest son. He had been the closest to Lyanna he knew, the two had spent all their time together. "What of Winterfell?" Rickard asked. "What happened here?" "With our armies south, production suffered, particularly in the cities. The lands north of Winterfell remained largely unaffected, however. We received the Tully children, including a pregnant Catelyn Tully. She gave birth a month ago to a boy she named Robb. She survived, though the Maester and Green Men have confirmed she will never bear children again. Something about her travels while pregnant. I also received Elia Martell according to your instructions. I sent her and her children on to Mount Starpoint. Then our armies returned north, were paid and sent home. The Winter Wolves are also sending some men north of the wall to end a wilderling band that has been raiding the gift recently." "You've done well, Benjen," Rickard said as he smiled at his son. Benjen nodded sadly. "I have a favor to ask, father." "What is it?" Rickard asked. "I want to join the Night's Watch." "No," Rickard replied. "No?" Benjen asked with a look of anger on his face. "Why not?" "I have plans for you." "Plans for me?" Benjen exclaimed. "I'm not going to be one of your pawns like Lyanna and Brandon were." "No," Rickard replied tersely, "you're not. If you don't like my plans, then you can join the Watch. I think, however, that you will like my plans for you." "What are they?" Benjen asked suspiciously. Rickard nodded to the bookshelf. "Can you get me the blue book with the white bindings on the bottom shelf?" Benjen did so and returned with the book in his arms. He went to hand it to Rickard, but Rickard shook his head. Read the title. Benjen glanced down and his eyes widened in surprise. The Winter Kingdom Beyond the Wall. Those plans were written up by Cregan Stark himself upon his return from the south. If you will have it, Benjen, I will name you Lord Beyond the Wall, and build you a castle and village upon the ruins of Hardham. Ricard said as he watched his son. I am planning to set up 4 lordships beyond the wall, one on the frozen shore, one in the Skirling Pass and another on the Fist of the First Men. Over all of these lordships I would name you Lord Paramount, and set you up at Hardham. You would be the first Lord Beyond the Wall since the wall was built. I will be Lord Beyond the Wall. Benjen asked incredulously. You will be? Ricard confirmed. I spoke to Lord Commander Corgyle a few years ago about it and he agreed to send some men to help set you up as well and familiarize you and your men with the surrounding lands. Benjen was silent for a long while, staring in awe at the book down in his hands. So? Ricard asked. Will you accept and become the first Lord Beyond the Wall in 10,000 years or will you join the Night's Watch? I will be Lord Beyond the Wall. Benjen exclaimed enthusiastically and clasped the book to his chest. Good. Ricard replied. Now take a seat. There is more that we need to talk about. Benjen did so, though he struggled to keep the smile off his face. Ricard sighed before turning his gaze to Ned. Ned, he said, you will be Lord of Winterfell sooner than you think. I plan to step down from my duties as of tomorrow. You will become Lord of Winterfell. You plan to step down? Ned exclaimed. What for? I need some time to clear my head. I've been talking to the Green Men as well. Something has happened. A dam was broken when your brother did what he did. I need to find out what happened. No. Ned exclaimed. I will do that. You can be Lord of Winterfell. Ricard shook his head. No, Ned. He replied. On the morrow you will be Lord of Winterfell. He held up a hand when Ned went to protest. No, he said. My decision is made. Ricard looked both Ned and Ashura in the eye. As the new Lord and Lady of Winterfell, there is much you need to know and learn. Ricard sighed. I have so little time to tell you, but what I don't tell you the stewards and other lords will be able to help you with. Ned nodded, though his face looked tense. Ashura was much better at keeping her features under control, and Ricard admired the girl. She would make a good Lady of Winterfell. You know how to play the game. Ricard said to Ashura. Everything you think you know about the game is wrong. You need to unlearn the way you learned to play it. What game? Ned asked and Ashura just smiled at him and patted his hand. Don't worry. She said. I know what he's talking about. The northern way of playing is to not play at all. There are strict rules about what you can and cannot do as Lord of Winterfell. They are written down in the bloody sanctions that you already know of, Ned. You will need to show them to Ashura eventually. She needs to know them. Ned nodded and Ricard turned back to Ashura. You must read the bloody sanctions. You must know them. I have already broken the bloody sanctions. You too cannot afford to break them as well. It would spell disaster for the empire we have worked for since we lost our crown. Ashura nodded and Ricard turned back to his youngest son. Benjen, leave us. Ricard commanded and his son obeyed. When the door had closed shut behind him, Ricard turned back to the two who were left. What I am about to tell you must never leave this room. Ricard said sternly and both of them nodded. Ricard observed them for a moment before reaching into his robes and removing a plain iron key. He handed it to Ned who looked at it, confused. What is this? He asked. The key to his books. Ned's eyes shot up and he held the key reverently. What books? Ashura asked. Brandon Snow's books. The man who changed the fate of the North forevermore. Ricard replied gravely. Ned tucked the key into his own pocket and nodded with a somber expression. I will guard it with my life. He said and Ricard believed him. He had a dutiful son after all. I know you will. Ricard replied. The door is behind the tapestry of Brandon Snow. The keyhole is hard to find. It's on the floor, not the wall, but the door is the wall. Make sure you tell no one of this but for your own son and heir. The Starks have guarded those books and the knowledge contained within for almost 300 years now. Do not be the first to breach our sacred oaths. I won't. Ned swore and Ricard nodded, satisfied. Good. Ricard replied. Now there is one last thing I must tell the both of you. What is it? Ned asked. The wolf pack. Ricard replied. As in Brandon's wolf pack? Ned asked. No, Ricard replied. The wolf pack of House Stark. You must know of it and how it works. It is paramount to the White Wolf. When he comes, the wolf pack must assemble. You need to know who is in the wolf pack, and their purpose. You must know how they fit in with the pack, and what their role is. You need to know everything about them, until you know the wolf pack better than you know your own family. Tell me and I will listen. Ned replied. So Ricard told him of the wolf pack. Notes. I only have one chapter to go, I have decided, so please make sure to leave your questions you think I haven't answered in this story yet. The next chapter should be up within the next few days, though no promises. The closer I get to the end, the harder it is to write. Once I have finished, I plan to take a short break before starting the second arc, which will cover the events of the books. Thank you all for your support. Chapter 68, The Long Summer. Summary. We got some POVs from Ricard, Davos, Ned, Arthur, Benjen and Roller. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. The Long Summer. Ricard. Ricard Stark mounted his horse under the light of a full moon, the new steel sword hanging at his side an unusual weight. He had given ice to Ned, for ice was the sword of the Lord of Winterfell, and that was what Ned was now. The dragon-glass dagger that had killed Rhaegar still hung in his belt, however, and it was a comforting weight for Ricard, the man who had lost everything. Ricard still wore his plain grey plate, though now he was wrapped in heavy furs and an oilskin cloak. It would be cold where he was planning to go. Ricard gently tapped the sides of his ever-faithful horse and it plodded forward, out of the stables of Winterfell, through the courtyard and through the ancient gates that Ricard had known since he was a boy. He descended down the slight slope, and into the Winter City. At this time of night the city was asleep. The inns and taverns had closed a few hours ago, and the city watch had moved the last drunken revelers out of the streets just after the moon hit its zenith. As such, the streets were empty and Ricard passed through the city unobserved. The night was clear and the stars shone brightly in the sky, providing a light for Ricard to see the city of his birth, the city he had been raised in along with all other northern boys at the time. He passed a bakery and he smiled fondly as he remembered raiding it as a boy with his companions. Many of them were dead now, killed by Aes after they had entered the city. Ricard was the sole survivor. He reached the gates and his gaze fell upon a figure waiting in the shadows. Well, not the only one. You were going to leave without me? Ethan Glover asked, his eyes shining in the starlight. Ricard sighed. You're not coming, Ethan. Stay here. Find a girl. Make some babies. Be happy. Ethan's gaze darkened and he shifted his feet. I can't. He muttered. Every time I close my eyes I'm back in those cells beneath the Red Keep. Ricard watched the young boy sadly. He had been forced to grow up too quickly. I'm sorry. Ricard said. You didn't deserve what happened to you. I should have gotten you out sooner. Ethan Glover did not dispute Ricard's statement, instead he shifted his gaze to the stars. Brandon would have loved a night like this. He said, and Ricard agreed. Ricard said fondly as he swung down off his horse. He would be riding along the King's Road on his horse, or camped beneath the stars in the Wolf's Wood, or fighting wildlings in the shadow of the wall. It gave him life. He loved life. Ethan said. Ricard's eyes crinkled as he remembered some of Brandon's accomplishments when he was little. Sometimes a little too much. Ricard saw the corner of Ethan's mouth upturn. He was a wild man. He said. No, Ricard said sadly. He was a wild wolf. Ethan agreed as he pulled a flask from his pocket. To Brandon. He said as he took a long swig, a very long swig in Ricard's opinion. To Brandon. Ricard agreed as he snatched the flask from Ethan's grasp and finished the flask off. It burned its way down his throat and settled in the bottom of his stomach, warming his cool bones. The two stood together, staring at the stars, remembering the wild wolf, the man that was a wolf, and the wolf that was a man. Together they remembered Brandon Stark, a son, a brother, and a friend. "Where are you going to go now?" Ethan asked, and Ricard shrugged. "I'll go where the cold winds blow me." Ethan nodded. "I still want to come." Ricard shook his head. "I want you to live, Ethan. Live for Brandon. Don't let the demons within your head destroy your life. I don't care how you do it. Find a way to get rid of them. If you're rid of the demons when I get back, I'll take you with me when I leave again." "So you're coming back?" Ethan asked. "Of course." Ricard confirmed. "I can't leave Ned to raise John," he scoffed. "He'll end up acting like a Vale Lord." "Is that such a bad thing?" Ethan asked with a wry grin. Lord Royce was an impressive man. "John is not a Vale Lord," Ricard replied. "John is a Stark of Winterfell. He is the blood of Brandon the Builder, of the Hungry Wolf, of Cregan Stark. He shares the same line as bloody Brandon the Blessed. And the grandson of the Burnt Lord," Ethan said with a serious expression before continuing. "The Burnt Lord, the man who survived burning by wildfire, the man who broke the Targaryen host upon the trident, and the man who sacrificed Rhaegar Targaryen to the gods. The man who has done more for the North than any lord before him." Ricard felt tears spring to his eyes as he heard Ethan tell him what he done. "I did what any father would have done," he murmured. "I avenged my son." "You avenged your son," Ethan agreed, "and every other northerner who was hurt by Aes madness." Ricard sighed. "I did terrible things." "You did," Ethan agreed, "but terrible times call for terrible measures." Ricard shook his head. "I went beyond just vengeance. The Tullys, for example. I was wrong, and I almost killed a girl because of it." Ethan sighed. "It seems you've got some demons too." Ricard felt a bubble of laughter rise up within his chest, and he snorted in amusement. "Aren't we a pretty pair?" he asked as he thought about everything that the two of them had been through in the last year. A man broken on the outside, and a man broken on the inside, sitting beneath the stars reminiscing over better days. Ethan smirked. "The bards will be falling over each other in their rush to sing our song." Ricard laughed and remounted his horse. "I will be back, Ethan. When I return you will come with me, and together we'll see the sights of the world. From Ass High to the Shield Islands, from the Summer Isles to the lands beyond the wall, we'll see it all." Ethan nodded and stepped back into the shadows. "I'll hold you to your word," he said as he raised a hand in farewell. "Farewell, Lord Stark." "Farewell, Ethan. Look after yourself for me. Watch over my grandson as well. Don't let my son fill his head with too many tales." "I won't," Ethan replied, and Ricard spurred his horse onwards, out of the gates of the Winter City, and to whichever lands and whoever the cold winds blew him. Davos. Davos watched from the prow of the ship as Bern Salt Stark guided their ship closer and closer to the little isle that was now his. In his arms was his Meria, a lady of the north now, and behind him his children tussled, all the sons of lords. Davos glanced back at Bern, who was guiding his own bastard son, Torrhen Snow, and Davos' eldest, Dale Seaworth, on how to steer a ship. His children were now the sons of a lord. They had a future, a better future than even Davos had dared dream of when he was one of the best smugglers in the narrow sea. Actually he was the best, but a little humility never killed anyone. The isle came into focus as they got closer, and Davos could see a small keep with a lighthouse attached set atop a cliff, while at the bottom of the cliff, rested a small town. The isle wasn't large by any means, and Davos reckoned he could have walked around it within a day, but it was his, and it was now home. He felt his throat thicken as he watched his new holdings draw closer, and his grip tightened on Meria. She smiled up at him, and Davos returned the smile fondly. "You're a lady now," he said. Meria scrunched up her nose. "I don't know how to be one of those." Davos shrugged. "I don't know how to be a lord either. But here I am. I guess we will have to figure it out as we go." Meria nodded. "I guess. Are you happy, love?" Davos asked, worried that this wasn't the life Meria wanted. "Of course," Meria replied. "Our sons have a future now. Is this what you wanted though?" Maria sighed. I would have been happy in King's Landing, as long as I had you and our children. It doesn't matter where we are as long as you and the children are with me. Paupers or lords, what does it matter? Davos smiled at her fondly. I love you, he said as he pressed a kiss to the top of her head. I love you too, she replied. The two stood in silence as the boat pulled into the large piers that sat next to the town. For such a small town, they had quite an extensive harbor. What do you think? A voice asked, and Davos turned to see Bern walking down the deck towards them, Davos and Torrhen trailing in his wake. Davos flicked his gaze back towards his new holdings. It's a large harbor. It is, Bern confirmed. This is normally where the ships that want to enter the Wolfsmoor stop to pick up a pilot. The pilots live in Light Harbor, the town that sits just there. Really? Davos asked. I didn't know that. Yes, Bern said. See those ships over there? Bern asked as he pointed to a smaller side harbor that housed 3 large warships and 2 smaller trading ships that could be converted. Yes, Davos said. What about them? They all belong to you now. They are your personal property, Bern replied, and Davos' jaw fell open. The 3 warships are used to stop anyone running off without pilots. They are some of the swiftest warships in these waters. The smaller vessels are yours to do with as you please during times of peace. The old lord used to use them for trade with Bravos. Davos nodded, and Bern guided them all of the ship and into the town proper. That over there, he said as he pointed to a large building, is the local tavern. I would advise visiting there every once in a while. You can always pick up some interesting stories from the pilots and they will love you for it. I will do that, Davos said as he took a long look at the building, committing it to memory. He would go and visit it on the morrow, he decided, for lunch perhaps. Bern led them up the hill and through the gates of the keep, which he informed them was called Saltile Hall. They entered into the courtyard to find a crowd of people waiting for them. To Davos' amazement, all of them fell to their knees upon his entrance and bowed his head. Your household, Bern informed him when he noticed the look upon his face. The servants, guards, stewards and the keepers of the lighthouse. They are here to serve you. Davos didn't stir, just stared in amazement at all the people that were under his care. Bern leaned in close. It's customary for you to tell them to rise. Davos noted with a start that they were all still on their knees. Ah, rise, Davos said, and he hopped they didn't notice the stutter within his voice. Thankfully enough of them heard, and they rose to their feet and stood before him. Davos looked at Bern, who shrugged. That is one way of doing it, though not necessarily the traditional way. It worked though, so I guess that's a good beginning. Can you help me? Davos whispered harshly. What am I meant to do now? Bern rolled his eyes good-naturedly and turned to the awaiting household. Lord Seaworth thanks you all for coming out to greet him, and thanks you for your continued service. Please return to your duties and Lord Seaworth will address you all at dinner tonight. Could the Castellan, captain of the guards and keeper of the lighthouse, please come and meet with Lord Seaworth now? 3 people detached themselves from the rest of the household, while everyone else turned away and dispersed back into the castle, to resume their duties no doubt. Who are they? Davos asked as the 3 drew closer. I'll introduce them, Bern replied as he smiled widely and extended a hand in greeting to the 3 men. John, you old sea dog, Bern exclaimed as he seized the hand of the oldest of the 3, a grey-haired, long-bearded old man, who carried himself with a permanent stoop. What have you been up to? Still keeping the lighthouse running? The man laughed and answered Bern's questions while Davos inspected the other 2 men. One was a younger man who carried himself nervously, wringing his hands and avoiding the gaze of everyone else. The last man was clad in armor and carried a sword at his belt. For all his marital appearance though, his gaze was soft and a smile lingered in the corners of his mouth. Davos, Bern called as he gestured him over. Come and meet your household. Davos walked over and extended a hand in greeting. The 3 men took turns shaking it and Bern pulled the first man forward. Davos, this is John Adley, the chief keeper of the lighthouse. Davos nodded a greeting and shook his hand again. It's a pleasure to meet you. John said as he pumped Davos' hand enthusiastically. I look forward to working with you. Davos nodded and turned to the next man that Byrne pulled forth. It was the young man who carried himself nervously. Your Castellan, Brandon Norton. Brandon shook his hand and said little, but Davos took a liking to the shy man. And finally, the captain of your guards, Hodder Emsworth. Davos smiled at the kindly-looking man, who shook his hand with a firm grip. Hodder turned to Maria and lightly kissed her hand. It is a pleasure to meet you both, he said as he smiled at them. I am responsible for many things around her, none more so than your personal protection. If you have any needs, do not hesitate to ask me. Davos nodded, still unsure about how to take all of this, when he noticed Byrne smile cheerfully and turned to leave. Well, I have to go if I want to get home before nightfall, so make sure to show him around, all right, Hodder? Hodder nodded and Byrne turned to leave, but Davos snatched his arm. You can't leave, he exclaimed, I still don't know what to do. You'll figure it out, Byrne assured him before leaning in. Trust me, Davos, you will make a better lord than you think. Follow your instincts with the people and they will adore you. You already charmed your way through the Stormlands and Dawn, you'll go fine with people sworn to serve and protect you. Davos flailed, unsure of how to respond, when Byrne patted his arm consolingly. Listen to Hodder and Brandon, he said. They will know how things are done around here. Take their advice and you will do well. With that, Byrne turned and walked away, calling for his bastard as he went, leaving Davos to figure out how to run his household alone. He felt a hand on his arm and looked down at his wife. Well, no, not totally alone. With renewed energy, Davos turned back to the captain of his guard and his steward. So, he said, how am I meant to be the Lord of the Isle of Salt? Eddard. Ned breathed in deeply and pushed open the door. He stepped inside the Great Hall of Winterfell and made his way up dais, and onto the ancient stone seat that sat in a central, commanding position. He was Lord of Winterfell now. His father had stepped down yesterday, handed him ice, and rode away in the middle of the night without even saying goodbye. When he would back, Ned had no clue. Ned looked out over the assembled mass of people who had come to court and his mouth ran dry. What was he meant to say to all these people? A flash of purple caught his eye on the side of the room, and he saw Ashura smiling at him, her purple eyes flashing brilliantly. Ned breathed in. He was Lord of Winterfell now and Warden of the North. This was his duty. Ned had always been good at fulfilling his duties. He got to his feet, and hoped the crowd did not notice his shaking leg. The war is over, Ned declared. And I hereby announce this court open to petitions. The crowd cheered and the first man stepped forward. Ned sat down, prepared to hear the man out. He was Lord of Winterfell and Warden of the North. He was the husband of Ashura and the father to Jon. He was the brother of Benjen and the son of Rickard. He was of the blood of the kings of winter, and one day, the White Wolf would spring from his line. He could deal with a court. Come hither, Ned called, and court began. Arthur. Arthur slogged his way through the gently falling rains and into the misty mountains. Gods, the north was cold. He missed the sun of his homeland, and the warmth of its dry deserts. He missed his family, his brother, his father and his littlest sister. At least he was still with Ashura. They had always been the closest of all the Dane siblings. The north was a beautiful place, filled with snow-swept plains, soaring mountains and expansive woods. Arthur could have liked it perhaps, but it was just too cold. A particularly bitter gust of wind swept through the valley he was riding in and sent his teeth to chattering. Are you cold? Roderick Walton asked, and Arthur stubbornly shook his head. No. Your teeth are chattering, Roderick replied, and Arthur glared at him. No, they're not. Arthur managed to hiss back. Roderick shrugged, and Arthur could not figure out how the man was so comfortable. He had foregone his armor for woolen clothes and a fur cloak, along with an oilskin cowl that kept the rain off his face. We are almost there anyway, Roderick replied, and he pointed to a glowing light in the distance. How long? Arthur asked as he squinted at the light through the heavy fog and rain. Maybe another half an hour at this pace. Arthur nodded. That was good. He could put up with another half an hour of this miserable weather. The two rode in silence for the rest of the journey, until Arthur saw their destination. His mouth fell open in disbelief. The mountain erupted out of the middle of the valley, and deep chasms surrounded its perimeter. Over one of these chasms stretched a narrow bridge that led to a small fortress that was nestled in between a tear in the mountain's face. The fortress was sturdily made and two towers had a commanding view of the bridge. It would have been impossible to sneak into this mountain without passing over the bridge, a feat that Arthur knew not many men would be brave enough to attempt. The walls of the gates and crenulations of the towers were lined with the now familiar sight of the Winter Wolves, those men who dedicated their lives to soldiering in the north. Ned had told him there was 12,000 such men, and the duties ranged from guarding Moat Cailin and the Wolf's Moor to going beyond the wall to break up troublesome wilderling bands. Martin Castle had been a Winter Wolf before he was the captain of Lord Stark's household guard, and he had been a very good fighter. Not an excellent one, and not Kingsguard quality, but then not many were. "What is this place?" Arthur asked in awe. "Welcome to Mount Starpoint," Roderick replied as he spurred his elk onto the bridge. Arthur glanced over the side of the bridge and felt dizzy as he beheld the black chasm that stretched beneath him. He glanced back at Roderick, who continued on unperturbed. "How sturdy is this bridge?" Arthur asked as he watched where his horse went warily. "It's designed to collapse if there is too much weight on it," Roderick replied, and Arthur felt his heart begin to beat within his chest. "How much weight?" he asked as he spurred his horse onwards, trying to get off this bridge as fast as possible. "That much weight," Roderick replied, and he pointed upwards. Arthur followed the direction of his finger and noticed with awe a carefully balanced boulder perched upon a crag that jutted out of the mountain's might face. "It's an emergency measure if Mount Starpoint ever comes under attack." Arthur swallowed. Who would ever be mad enough to attack this god-forsaken mountain? "Many men would," Roderick replied darkly. "This mountain holds many secrets and treasures that men all over the world crave. I am charged with defending this mountain, and I shall. I will not be the first to fail House Stark." "The first?" Arthur asked, confused. "Are you a lord?" "A lord commander," Roderick replied with a wry grin. "Born to a man of arms in service to House Bolton. At 5 I was chosen by the Green Men to serve here." "You didn't get a choice?" Arthur asked. "None of the Weirwood warriors get a choice. We are all handpicked by the Green Men. It is an honor and a privilege to serve our gods in such a way. Many a young boy dreams of serving in our ranks. Very few young boys ever get to." "The Weirwood warriors?" Arthur asked. "Yes," Roderick replied, exasperated. "The soldiers who fought Randil Tali at God's Eye under Lord Eddard's command." "That was you?" Arthur exclaimed. "Yes," Roderick sighed, rolling his eyes. "It took you a while to figure that one out." Arthur shrugged. "I thought that was some great secret." "It is," Roderick replied. Arthur frowned. "Well then, why did you tell me?" "You are not going to tell anyone." "How do you know?" "Your family's fate is tied with that of the North now. Betray the Starks and you will be betraying your own blood." Roderick's words left a bitter taste in his mouth as he thought of his oaths as Kingsguard. "We are here," Roderick announced as he stopped his elk directly in front of the gates. "The gates are shut," Roderick called out to someone on top of the wall. "The mummer's farce isn't done," came the reply. "The White Wolf hasn't risen," Roderick called back. Silence greeted Roderick's strange declaration, before the sound of moving chains filled the air and the gates began to open. Roderick tapped his elk and it made its way through the gates, and after another glance at the black chasm behind him, Arthur followed Roderick in. Almost immediately he was grasped by strong hands and a sack was thrown over his head. Arthur struggled, but the hands that held him were strong. "I'm sorry, Arthur," he heard Roderick say, "but not even you are permitted to see what lies beyond these gates. You couldn't have given me a bit of warning." Arthur scoffed as his hands were tied behind his back. "No," Roderick replied. "Then you would have made sure to look and remembered what you had seen. Now all you will remember is being dragged from your horse and bound." Arthur scoffed in anger, but allowed himself to be led away. He tried to keep track of his sense of direction, but he went up and down so many stairs and around so many corners that soon he had no sense of where he was. He was taken like this for at least 15 minutes, the only sound being the scuffing of his feet upon the floor, and the low breathing of Roderick, who held him firmly by his arm. Eventually they stopped and Arthur felt Roderick untie his hands, before pulling away his hood. He blinked, his eyes unaccustomed to the strong light. As his vision cleared, his heart stopped in his chest. She stood before him, as beautiful as the day he had last seen her. Arthur smiled wryly. "Hello, Princess." That seemed to stir something within her, and her eyes blazed with fury. He saw her hand, and comprehended what it was about to do, but for some reason didn't move. It hit him hard, and left his cheek stinging. He grunted in pain, before rubbing it. Then her other hand came around and slapped him on the other cheek. "Ow!" he muttered as he glared at her. "What was that for?" he asked. "What was that for?" she exclaimed, and then she slapped him again. "All right, stop," Arthur demanded. "No," Elia replied, and then she slapped him again. Arthur stepped away from her, and glared at her. "Are you done yet?" Elia's mask cracked and he saw he wince, before she shook out her hands. "Damn, that hurt," she muttered. "That's what happens when you slap someone, Princess," Arthur replied. "That's why it's better to hit them with a closed fist." Elia glared at him before closing her fist and bringing it up in front of his face. "Like this?" she asked. Arthur shook his head. "Put your thumb outside of your palm. That way you won't break it." Elia nodded and readjusted her grip, before shooting her now properly closed fist forward and into his nose. Tears sprung into his eyes and he heard something go crack. Something warm and coppery began to pour out of his nose, and Arthur struggled to remain on his feet as the pain made him woozy. "Was that better?" he heard Elia ask, and even though he couldn't see her he could hear the smugness rolling off her. Arthur stumbled backwards until he felt the wall beneath his hands. He sunk to his haunches and tilted his head back to stop the torrent of blood that poured from his nose. "It was great," Arthur replied nasally. "What are you here for, Arthur?" Elia asked, and Arthur sighed. "I wanted to know if you were still alive." "Didn't you believe Lord Stark?" "No. You should have. He's yet to break one of his oaths." "Ouch. That stung." Arthur scowled. "You don't get to judge me." "Yes, I do," Elia replied angrily. "I am the princess you were sworn to protect. Where were you when Amory Lorque and Gregor Clegane came to my chambers to kill me? Where were you when they came to riddle Rhaenys' body with holes and crush Aegon's head against a wall? Where were you?" Arthur heard her voice hitch as she continued on. "Where were you when I needed you? Where were you when I lay quivering in my chambers wondering if this would be the day that I would die? Where were you?" Elia was in tears now and rightfully angry. "I wasn't there," Arthur replied softly. "No, you weren't," Elia replied coldly, the tears still streaming down her fair cheeks. "Forgive me," Arthur begged of her as he pushed away from the wall and fell to his knees before her. "Forgive me. I was wrong. I should have been there for you. Forgive me, and I swear I will never leave your side again. I will be here to protect you from any who come to hurt you." Elia smiled sadly, and Arthur saw the anger fade from her eyes. "Oh, Arthur," she replied, "I don't need anyone to protect me anymore. No one can hurt the dead." Arthur looked at her and saw the woman he had loved. "What about love?" Arthur asked, feeling bolder than he had in years. "Can someone love the dead?" Elia looked deep into his eyes and shook her head. "No," she declared, and then she turned away, leaving Arthur staring at her retreating figure. Arthur nodded, but on the inside his heart was screaming at him to argue further. She was right though. How can you argue with the dead? How can you love the dead? How can you marry the dead? He had lost everything in this war. He had lost his best friend. He had lost his king. He had lost his sister for a time, and now he had lost his love. Arthur turned back to the door he had been shoved in through and saw Roderick Walton waiting for him. "How did it go?" Roderick asked. "Take me back to Winterfell," Arthur replied, his voice hoarse with grief. "Take me back to Ashura. Take me back to Jon." Roderick nodded and left, leaving Arthur alone with his broken heart. Benjen. Benjen rode at the head of the column as it made its way into the ruins of Hardham, on Storrold's Point. Benjen looked around at the ruins. There wasn't much to see. What little buildings were left were overgrown with shrubs, while the cliffs that loomed over the ruins screamed in unison with the wind, setting the teeth of every man present on edge. Hardham was a hard place. But it was now Benjen Hardstark's home, his holdings, his responsibility. Not much, is it? Benjen turned to see Thorin half-hand approaching him. Thorin was a brother of the Night's Watch who had been given on loan to Benjen from Lord Commander Corgyle. He was a legend, and Benjen was still in awe of the man. "It'll do," he replied. Thorin cracked a smile at the young lord. "That's the spirit," he said. "Keep that up and perhaps you'll have a chance of succeeding here." "You don't think I will?" Benjen asked. Thorin shook his head. "These wildlings aren't about to bow down to you just because your father said so. They don't know your father, they don't know what he has done, who he is. They only respect strength. If you want them to bow down to you, you will need to show them you are strong enough for them to follow first. Then they will consider bowing." Benjen nodded thoughtfully. "I will take your advice on board." The two looked around at the ruins. "What's your first order, Lord Hardstark?" One of the builders called out to him, and he turned away to begin directing the building of Hardham. He looked down at the little book in his hands. "We need shelter for now," Benjen called, and he began to direct the men to start pitching the tents and organizing the supplies. Benjen nodded to himself as he watched the men work. He would forge this little peninsula into the shining jewel of the north, a city to rival White Harbor and the Winter City, a fortress to rival Moat Cailin and Mount Starpoint, and a harbor to rival even the Moors. He was Lord Benjen Hardstark, Lord beyond the wall. He would not fail his father, his brother, or the White Wolf. He would go down in the history books as the man who brought the true north into the north. Putting his little book into his pocket, he walked over to where his men worked and began to help them pitch the tents. Tomorrow they would begin work on rebuilding Hardham, but today they would focus on surviving. Rolla was dying. The ship wouldn't reach the walls of Volantis in time. She would have to leave her children with Sir Willem D'Ari and Lucerys Valerian. They would look after them. Her sweet Viserys and her beautiful Daenerys. "Let me hold her," she whispered, and someone passed a crying bundle into her arms. Outside a terrible storm raged, throwing the ship to and fro upon the surface of the water. "Stormborn," Rolla muttered. "Daenerys Stormborn. She was born in a storm, you see." "I see," she heard someone say. But they didn't see. They didn't see the storm her little Stormborn would bring. By Viserys' side together they would retake their kingdoms and throne with fire and blood. Fire and blood. She wheezed, and she heard someone murmur behind her. "Fire and blood. Where is my son?" she asked, and then Viserys was there, fat tears rolling down his hollow cheeks. "Don't cry," Rolla whispered. "Be brave for me, all right?" Viserys nodded, but his bottom lip trembled. "Sir Willem will look after you and Lord Valerian will protect you. You need to look after Daenerys though. Will you look after her for me?" Viserys nodded and Rolla smiled. "I love you, Viserys. My brave little king. I'm sorry I have to leave you, but you will find support in Volantis. One day, my son, you will retake our kingdoms. Promise me you will make Rickard Stark pay for what he did to Rhaegar. Promise me." "I promise." Viserys managed to sputter out, and Rolla relaxed, content that those who had hurt her family so much would one day pay for what they had done. Content, she closed her eyes and embraced death as an old friend, rather than a feared foe. The end.